Carry on.
I've got it. Thanks, man. Thank you, Michelle. Good morning, Leapfrog family. Um, Thank you for having me again this morning. What we're going to have a look at. I'm Hein Duisel from the Somerset West branch here in Cape Town. So, thank you for joining me and listening to me again. What we're going to have a look at this morning are the certificates of compliance that we have to deal with when we sell or transfer a property. Um, so, just as an introduction, as um, you know, the transfer process can be costly. So normally, and most of the costs are paid by the purchaser. The purchaser pays the transfer costs and the transfer duty and all those things that are very expensive. But we must just always remind the sellers that, Mr. Seller, you must always remember and just keep in the back of your mind that, yes, you are liable as the seller to pay the agent's commission. And you must pay, for example, the cancellation fee that your bank will charge to cancel your bond of 4,800 Rand. Mr. Seller, you must just remember that the attorneys that will attend to the transfer of the property will require you to pay advance rates and taxes to the municipality in order for them to get a rates clearance certificate to lodge at the deeds office. And the other important costly thing that we must just make the sellers aware of are the certificates. So, Mr. Seller, you know that you have to have an electric compliance certificate and a gas certificate and an electric fence certificate and a plumbing certificate if need be, but we'll get to that. So the sellers also obviously pay for that, and it can be quite costly if there are a lot of repairs that need to be done at the property. Um, so if you have a look, most of these certificates that you will find in your offer to purchase, most of those certificates um, are dealt with and are subject to the Occupational Health and Safety Act. Those are the regulations that places a duty on people to have those certificates. So if you have a look at the Occupational Health and Safety Act, that legislation was actually created to protect employees in the workplace. So, in commercial buildings, in industrial buildings, at their offices, etc. So, that legislation, the whole reason for the main reason for that legislation was to protect the health and the safety of workers, of people that work in commercial, industrial buildings, in factories, etc., etc., etc. So that was the main reason for this legislation. However, this legislation also get triggered as soon as there is a sale or disposal of a property. So the legislation or the act says that as soon as you dispose of a property, so what is disposal? The act says that as soon as you sell a property, or even if you lease a property or donate a property, these regulations will be applicable in that specific scenario. So, in our scenario, yes, we are not dealing with commercial properties, we're not dealing with a factory or business premises. We are dealing with not primary, but private residences. But as soon as a property is disposed of, then this legislation kicks in. And that is why we require certain certificates to be issued by the seller because he is disposing of a property. So the sellers and the buyers must understand that there is a need for these certificates because of the Occupational Health and Safety Act, despite the fact that it is not a commercial property, that it is a residential property. So if we And you'll obviously see these certificates in your offer to purchase. Now, there are normally, or to a maximum, 5 certificates that must be issued, and we'll have a look at them just now. So, your duty as an estate agent is to advise the seller of the importance and the legality and the obligation that he has to issue these certificates or get them issued prior to the transfer of the property. And then at least you can put your purchaser's mind at ease to say, listen, you Mr. Purchaser, just remember the seller must issue these certificates so you will get a clean property with a clean bill of health in respect of electrical and gas, etc., etc., etc. So if we have a look at the main 5 certificates that you will see in your offer to purchase, you will see that there would be an electrical compliance certificate. Now, the electrical compliance certificate is regulated by the Occupational Health and Safety Act. You might also have a water installation certificate, which is the plumbing certificate. That all depends on the specific municipality. So that is not governed by the Occupational Health and Safety Act. That is governed by the specific municipal bylaws. So, for example, in Cape Town, with water scarcity and all those lovely things, the municipality brought that certificate in order to protect our water resources, to make sure that no water goes to waste, that there are no leaking taps or leaking pipes at a property whereby water is being lost. So that depends wherever you operate from. It all depends on that municipal bylaw. So, for example, in the city of Cape Town, the city of Cape Town has those municipal as that municipal bylaw, and it applies to the property situated in the municipality in the city of Cape Town. So, for example, here where I am in Somerset West, if you just go around the mountain towards Rooiels, Pringle Bay, Betty's Bay, Kleinmond, Hermanus, all those places, they form part of the Overstrand municipality. They don't form part of the city of Cape Town municipality. So plumbing certificates for those properties that are 30 kilometers from me, even less, where else is less than that. Betty's Bay is 30. So, but I mean, it doesn't apply to those properties just around the mountain here next to me. It only applies to properties in the city of Cape Town. So it all depends on the specific municipal bylaws. Then there's also gas compliance certificates that is also governed by the Occupational Health and Safety Act. Beetle compliance certificates are not governed by any legislation or any municipal bylaws or anything like that. That just came through time, it's almost like common law. That certain certificate, that the beetle certificates must all, just to ensure that the wood or timber structures are beetle free. But it's not governed by any legislation or any municipal bylaws. Then there's also the electric fence certificates that came in 2012. That is also governed by the Occupational Health and Safety Act. So 3 of the certificates are governed by the Occupational Health and Safety Act: electric compliance, the gas compliance, and the electric fence certificate. The water installation compliance certificate or plumbing certificate is governed by the specific municipality. So not all municipalities imposes that condition on properties. And then there's the beetle compliance certificate. That's not in terms of any legislation. It's just through practice that came as one of the requirements in the offer to purchase when you sell or dispose of a property. So if we have a look at the electrical compliance certificate, this is obviously where property is being sold or transferred. Then there has to be an electric compliance certificate issued by the seller just to show that that electrical installation, the wiring, the plugs, the sockets, the earth, every plug must be earthed and every light fixture must be earthed. All those things are in order and according to the standards set by the regulator, so that there's no risk of wire shorting and the place burning down, etc., etc. So that is to confirm that the electrical installation is compliant. The one thing that is interesting is that it's just there for the wiring, the sockets, the plugs, etc. It does not certify that the appliances which plugs into that electrical system, that the appliances are in working order. For example, if the seller has a stove that plugs into the system, obviously, a stove with those plates at the top or whatever, and one of those plates do not work, the electrical compliance certificate has got nothing to do with that stove that is not in working order, where one of the plates do not turn on, etc., etc. The electrical compliance certificate stops at the plug or stops at the light fitting fixture, not the bulb. So even the bulb, sometimes we get complaints that, yes, the purchaser, yes, I've got the compliance certificate, but there are 3 light bulbs that are not working. The light bulbs are not covered by the compliance certificate. The certificate stops at the socket for the light bulb, because that bulb might blow within an hour after the certificate was issued. So it doesn't certify the 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 working or the correctness of a bulb or a stove or something like that. So when the purchaser phones us and says, he moved into the property, he tried to switch the stove or the oven on, the oven doesn't switch on, or the little light bulb in the oven doesn't work, that's got nothing to do with the compliance certificate, nothing whatsoever. If there are issues with a stove that doesn't work, that is something that we will then have to take up with the seller to say, Mr. Seller, in your condition report, you never mentioned that one plate on your stove doesn't work, or that your oven doesn't work, or that the air conditioning unit in the lounge doesn't work. That doesn't form part of the electrical compliance certificate, because, as I said, it just goes to the plug, the air conditioning unit is plugged into the wall. It stops. The electrical compliance certificate stops at that plug. That plug has been earthed, and that's what the electrical contractor certified. So we must then go back to the seller and say, Mr. Seller, I had a look in your condition report. You didn't make mention of the air conditioning unit that doesn't work, or the stove or the oven, whatever. You need to rectify this from your side. We can't go back to the electrician because it's got nothing to do with the electrician. He doesn't certify the appliances. He just certifies the installation. That is it. So that's just important to remember as well. So that is why it's also important to tell the sellers, if there's an appliance like an air conditioning unit or the stove or the oven that doesn't work, or the pool pump, for example, you need to tell us about this, because yeah, don't worry, I've got to get the electrical compliance certificate and, they'll sort that out. No, they won't. They won't sort that out. You need to tell us, because that is a separate issue from the electrical compliance certificate. So that's just important to remember there. So with regards to the electrical compliance certificate, the certificate is valid for a period of 2 years, unless you have done changes to the electrical system. What does that mean? If you built on a little granny flat, or if you changed the one chandelier that you had in the dining room, and you thought, nee, dit is nou te oude doos, I'd rather install downlighters here. I'd rather want 2 or 3 downlighters in my dining room. I'm going to take the chandelier out and install downlighters. Then your seller has changed the installation. So then that certificate is not valid for the period of 2 years. It's only valid for 2 years unless the seller made changes to the system. So if he has made changes to the system, he must get a brand new certificate issued again. But normally, and obviously, those certificates must be issued by a certified, registered electrical contractor. Must give that certificate. But normally, obviously, in our offer to purchasers, well, very often it says that the seller must provide a new electrical compliance certificate. That's it. He must. We're not going to look at the 2 year, etc., because it's still risky. He might have made changes, something might have changed, or whatever. The regulations might have changed. So, the best scenario is obviously to get a new certificate when the property is sold. But yes, the certificate is valid for a period of 2 years since when it was last issued to the seller, unless he made changes to that electrical system. So again, the electrical certificate only certifies the safety of the wiring, the sockets, the switches, the main distribution board, the earthing, and that like. Doesn't certify any appliances or anything like that. Very often the purchaser wants to get his own electrical contractor in there, which obviously can be arranged at his cost. He can have his own inspection done as well. But yeah, if you have a look at the Occupational Health and Safety Act of 1993, you'll see right at the bottom there, Regulation 5, subparagraph 5. It says there that the owner or a lessor of a property may not allow change of ownership in a property in respect of an electrical compliance certificate where the certificate is older than 2 years. If we have a look at the water installation compliance certificate, or as we know it in the Cape as the plumbing certificate, this, as I said, it will depend on. There's just one more thing that I wanted to mention about the electrical. Sorry, ma'am. With regards to electrical compliance certificates, sometimes, and I'm just trying to think of a scenario that I dealt with. It was a property in Melkbosstrand, here along the west coast of Cape Town, and it was a house very close to the beach. The property was transferred. The purchaser didn't want a compliance certificate for the electricity because he was going to demolish the property. He was going to make it pretty much just leave the shell of the property. He was going to take out all the taps, all the geysers, all the windows, doors, all the electrics. He was going to take everything out. So in that scenario, he agreed that he doesn't want the seller to provide an electrical compliance certificate because there is no need for it. Because on the day of transfer, when he becomes the owner, his contractors is going to start knocking out everything, ripping out the electrical wires, the plugs, everything. So that electrical compliance certificate on the day of transfer is in any way going to be worthless because the installation has changed. They're going to pull out all the lights, all the fixtures, all the fittings, everything. So it's just remember that they can do that. The purchaser can agree that he doesn't require the electrical compliance certificate, and if need be, he will have it done when he has completed his construction, etc., because he will then get the certificate once he's done his changes to the electrical system. In my scenario, what happened was this purchaser's bond, it was with Standard Bank, let's say, for example. Standard Bank approved his bond and it was subject to an electrical compliance certificate being issued. So obviously I had to go back to the purchaser to say, Mr. Purchaser, you'll see in your bond approval, you must get an electrical compliance certificate, please. It's a condition. So he said, no, but the seller must normally provide that. I said, yes, but we signed an agreement whereby you agreed that you will be liable for the electrical compliance certificate and that there is no duty on the seller to issue you with one prior to transfer because you are going to demolish the property. So then the purchaser had to go and get an electrical compliance certificate. He had to pay his contractor to have it done prior to transfer. And then obviously after transfer, he was going to knock the whole place down in any event. But you can agree there too. But yeah, it's just important for the purchaser to remember his bank might require it, and then he needs to get it done before the transfer takes place. He can't get it done after the transfer has taken place. If we have a look at the water installation um, or the plumbing certificate, as I said, this isn't regulated by any statutory legislation, like, for example, the Occupational Health and Safety Act. It's governed by the specific municipality where that property is situated. Like in the city of Cape Town, if the property is situated in the city of Cape Town, that plumbing certificate must be issued. If it's the property is situated in the Oeverstrand municipality, 15 kilometers to the left, then it is not required. So it all depends on the municipal bylaws. And obviously, those certificates must be issued by an accredited plumber as well. And the main purpose, as I said, for those certificates, it's there so that water does not waste, that there are no leaking pipes, etc. So when you have a look at that plumbing certificate, it's actually very simple. There are 3 or 4 things that the plumber checks. What they do is they get to the house, they close all the taps. So the shower taps, the bathroom taps, the sink in the bathroom, the sink in the kitchen, they close all the taps, and then they go out to the meter, to the outside water meter, and they go and have a look whether it moves, whether there's any movement. If there's no movement, beautiful. They know that there is no water running or leaking out of one of these pipes underground. And then they'll issue the certificate. There are other things that they check as well. They check that there are no storm water running into the sewerage system, etc., etc. But the main thing is just to check that there are no leaks when all the taps are closed, that there are no leaks. If the meter is still running, then they need to go and find the leak. They'll have to get, those water leak detection services where they pump gas into the pipes and they go with their meters to find out where is the leak underground so that they can, or in the wall, so that they can fix the leak. So that's what they do. It's imposed by the municipality in terms of the bylaws, and there's no time frame for which that certificate is valid for. It's not like the electrical compliance certificates that's valid for 2 years unless you've changed something. So the legislation just says that the owner of a property, when he disposes of the property, must obtain a plumbing certificate. So for each and every transfer. So let's say, for example, I sold my property to Michelle today, and I gave the plumbing certificate to Michelle. Tomorrow, Michelle sells that property to her neighbor. Michelle will have to get a plumbing certificate as well. Despite the fact that there is a 1-day difference between the 2 transactions, she must also get a plumbing certificate. That is what the legislation requires. On transfer, on sale of a property, the owner of the property must obtain a plumbing certificate. Klaar. There are no 2 ways about it. So you can't pass the plumbing certificate on like an electrical certificate from one to the other. You can't do that. And the parties can also not agree. The purchaser cannot agree, Mr. Seller, you know what? I don't need a plumbing certificate. Thank you very much. You cannot do that. The legislation does not allow you. It says that every owner must provide, and that certificate must be provided to the municipality before the transfer is registered at the deeds office. So that certificate must be provided to the municipality, for example, in Cape Town, and it gets emailed to the email address water@capetown.gov.za. So that certificate must be issued for each and every single transaction when a property is sold by the owner of the property. If we have a look at gas compliance certificates, that also obviously depends on whether there is a gas installation at the property. If there isn't a gas stove or gas bry or anything like that, then it's not necessary to have a gas compliance certificate for obvious reasons. But obviously, you'll discuss this with your seller and when you do your mandate and when you do your condition report, etc. And this is also a requirement in terms of the Occupational Health and Safety Act. There's a portion there, pressure equipment regulations, that deals with liquefied petroleum gas safety regulations. So again, when that owner of the property installed that gas fixture, a gas fireplace or braai or stove or oven, whatever, that person that installed it would have issued that owner with a gas compliance certificate. So again, so when you sell that property, you have to get that certificate again. And again, that certificate is not valid the same as a plumbing certificate. It's not valid for 2 years or for 6 months or for a year. Whenever the property is sold, the certificate must be issued by a qualified inspector, our authorized person. And obviously, that certificate would have been issued immediately when the gas installation was installed at the property. But if your owner made some changes to the gas installation, if he moved the gas bottle, he was not happy with it in the scullery, he wanted to put the gas bottle outside of his house in a little metal frame box, as soon as it's moved, you need a new certificate. So as soon as you've altered the installation, you must get a new certificate as well. And obviously, when you dispose of, when the installation changes hands, then your seller must provide that certificate. So that certificate, what they do is they check obviously the pipes, that gas pipe feeding the gas from the gas bottle or the cylinder to the appliance like the fireplace or braai. That pipe must be a specific thickness. So they check the thickness, they check whether there are any leaks in respect of the connections to the gas bottle or to the appliance, they check whether there are any leaks in the pipes. And they also make sure that there is an emergency shut-off valve if anything goes wrong there with the gas installation. If there's a fire, there's an emergency shut-off valve as well. And the parties cannot agree to waive this certificate. You cannot say, ag nee, dis nie nodig, jy moenie worry, I don't need it. No. The certificate must be issued in respect of each and every single transfer or disposal of a property, and the certificate, as the offer to purchase will state, must be in place prior to the transfer of the property. If we have a look at Beetle compliance certificates, the Beetle compliance certificate, as we said, it's not governed by any legislation, by any statutory laws or regulations. The Beetle certificate is there to protect a purchaser from purchasing a property where there are wood floors or trusses or wood ceilings, etc., with infestation in it. So very often in the agreement, they require that the certificate must be obtained from a relevant inspector, the Boer Beetle inspector, due to the risk involved with the infestation at the property, because obviously if there's infestation, it will damage the wood at the property, and it will reduce the value in the property if there is such infestation. The people that inspect those properties for infestation, you must also just remember that that inspection only relates to visible or accessible wood. So what it means is that when the inspector comes into the property, what he's going to do is he's going to climb into the ceiling of the house. He's going to go and have a look at the trusses in the ceiling to make sure that there's no infestation over there. Because obviously if there's infestation over there with the weight of the roof and the infestation damaging the wood and causing the wood to rot, that whole roof can collapse, and obviously, seriously injure or kill people that reside in the property. So that's one of the first things that the inspectors will check. They'll check the trusses in the roof to make sure that there's no infestation there. Then they will come into the house. If there are wooden parquet flooring, wooden paneling maybe around windows or door frames, they will check that wood. So any visible or wood that's accessible will be checked and inspected. I had a scenario not too long ago. Obviously, in these old houses that had wooden floors many, many moons ago, and obviously in the 60s or 70s, everything was carpeted. So, the wooden floors were covered by carpets. I don't know why, but okay, doesn't matter. And then a transfer of property, the beetle certificate was there, all the certificates were in place. The purchaser phoned a week later to say that, Hein, there's issues here, man. There are beetle in the wooden floors under the carpets, because what they did was they obviously lifted the carpets to get back to the natural, beautiful wood floors that were there, sand them down and varnish them, etc. Beautiful. But when they lifted the carpets, they realized that there's a little section, a portion that had beetle in it. So he was upset as to how can the beetle inspector issue the certificate if there is beetle at the property. That is why the regulations state that it only relates to visible or accessible wood at the property. So I explained to the purchaser that that certificate was issued for all the visible wood. You cannot expect the inspector to go rip out all the carpets in the property to inspect the wooden floors underneath the carpet. That will take him, how long? A week? What would the cost be with that if you had to go and rip up all the carpets and put all the you can't do that. Practically, that's just not something that can be done. So it's also just important to remind sellers or purchasers that, look, this beetle certificate is only in respect of visible or accessible wood. You cannot expect the inspector to rip out the carpets to inspect the wooden planks underneath the carpet. The certificate for the beetle is valid for between 3 and 6 months. But again, the practice is that whenever a property is sold, just get a new certificate in any event as well. Because, well, look, the scenario or the chances of you selling the property within 3 to 6 months after the purchaser or the owner to transfer is very slim. But yeah, the certificates would normally be valid for 3 to 6 months. That is normally only for the purchaser to have a comeback against the inspector that did the inspection. If you take transfer and you find out, but there are borer beetle in the trusses, and this is now 2 months after I took transfer of the property and after the inspection was done, then the inspector must come out and he must come and tent the place and poison them, do whatever he needs to do to get rid of the borer beetle. Then we've also got, sometimes we've got electric fence certificates. So in 2012, I think it was, the Occupational Health and Safety Act amended the regulations with regards to electric compliance certificates to also include electric fence certificates under the electrical machinery regulations, whereby if a property does have an electric fence, the owner must also, when he disposes of that property, have a valid electric fence compliance certificate. So normally when the electric fence would have been installed, he would have received the certificate from the person, the electrician that did the installation for him. So when there is a change of ownership, he must now provide a certificate to the new owner. There's no time frame for the electric fence certificate to be valid, like an electric compliance certificate that's valid for 2 years. There's no such time frame for these certificates. It only says that if, as long as the current installation, the electric fence, has not been altered, modified, or amended since it was installed, it will be seen as a valid certificate. So no mention is made in the regulations with regards to the time period for when that certificate will lapse or become invalid. But in practice, you require the seller to provide you with a new certificate prior to transfer, because we don't know whether he made any alterations or changes or modified that electric fence system since it was installed. So, just get a new certificate and you'll see your offer to purchase. It will just say, if there is an electric fence, obviously, the seller must provide a certificate. And the guy that comes to do the electrical compliance certificate will just do the one for the electric fence as well, and we'll just include it in the electrical compliance certificate. Then, obviously, we sell properties that form part of a sectional title unit, and in terms, sometimes you'll see that on the boundary of that scheme or the flats, on the boundary wall around the property of the flats, there would be electric fence around the boundary. Now, that electric fence, it's got nothing to do with the owner that is selling his flat. That's not his fence as owner. That fence is on the common property. And we know that the common property is the responsibility of the body corporate. So the body corporate of the sectional title scheme should have an electrical compliance certificate for the electrical fence that is on the perimeter or on the boundary wall of the scheme. So when we do a transfer, we will write to the managing agents on behalf of the body corporate, and we'll ask the managing agents, dear Marwright or Trafalgar, whoever, we know that you are the managing agents of Sea Breeze Vistas in Bloberg Strand. Can you please provide us with a copy of the electric fence compliance certificate that the body corporate is obliged to have? And they will then send that to us. And if they do come back and say, but we don't have one, then we'll tell them, well, in terms of the Occupational Health and Safety Act, the body corporate, the owner of the common property, must have one. So please instruct somebody to obtain a certificate for that electric fence that was installed at the premises. And then they will sort that out on behalf of the body corporate, and they will communicate with the necessary contractors. So obviously, you will go through your offer to purchase. You will determine what certificates are applicable to you or not. The electrical fence, the electrical compliance certificate is obviously valid in respect of any property other than a vacant plot that you are selling, where there is no building or structure. The plumbing certificate all depends on the municipality where your property is situated. The borer beetle certificate, it's not by law, but it is just to safeguard the purchaser not to take transfer of a property that is infested with borer beetle. I know that, I think in Durban, it is pretty much in terms of, I suppose in Durban, it's in terms of the municipal bylaws, because of the risk of infestation in Durban, where it's wet and humid, and there's a bigger risk of borer beetle being present in Durban than the other provinces. I think in terms of the municipal bylaws, for example, there, it will be a condition that when you dispose of a property, you must have that borer beetle certificate in place. The gas compliance certificate, again, only applicable if there's a gas oven, a gas stove, a gas braai, a gas fireplace, etc., etc., etc. And you will communicate and tell the parties why it's necessary and why it must be done and all those lovely things, and to the seller that there are certain costs involved. Luckily, obviously, those costs of the repairs maybe that had to be done to the installation can just be deducted from the proceeds of the sale. He doesn't have to pay it up front. The sellers can instruct the attorneys just to deduct that amount of money from the proceeds and to pay those contractors once the transfer has registered. Then, with regards to the Property Practitioners Act, the one that you guys love so much, there are certain rules and regulations and provisions in the Property Practitioners Act as well that relates, section 66, I think, relates to not influencing people, inspectors, contractors who attend to the issuing of the certificate. So if you have a look at that section, just to keep in mind that there's a prohibition on conduct to influence the issue of certain certificates. So a property practitioner or an estate agent may not in any way offer or receive financial or other incentives to make use of specific contractors, or otherwise you as an estate agent, a property practitioner, may not influence a person at the request of the seller to issue a certificate required by law based on his or her expert opinion in respect of the condition or defects of the electrical wiring, the presence of vermin, and the presence of water, damp, or any other relevant matter or condition which may be provided for in the law. So you may not receive any finances, kickbacks, and you may not influence that person when issuing the certificate as an expert to issue the certificate when they are not compliance with the necessary regulations in place. A property practitioner who contravenes the subsection 1 or a person who accepts any such incentive is guilty of a crime. So the conveyancers attending to the transfer of the property, we ensure that those compliance certificates are in place before the property is transferred at the deeds office, because that is what the offer to purchase says. That is what on your offer to purchase that you negotiated between the seller and the purchaser, your offer to purchase will say that the electrical compliance or the plumbing or the gas or the beetle certificates, the seller will arrange for same and pay the costs, and same will be in place prior to transfer of the property. So that's a specific clause in the agreement. So that is why we as the conveyancers will ensure that those certificates are in place before the property is transferred. So we will receive those certificates from the contractors, from Bugs and Sparks or Techno Bugs or whoever, and on the day of transfer, we will then send those certificates to the purchaser, to the new owner. And, very often there are comebacks. Very often there are purchasers that phone us to say, but, the electricity trips, so when I switch the stove on, yes, I know the stove isn't covered, but then it trips the main board, the main distribution board. There's some or other incorrect connection or something here. Then we ask the electrician to go out and to go and sort it out, to go and have a look and see what went wrong and to rectify the issue if there are any issues. The same with the plumbing certificate. If the transfer takes place and the purchaser phones to say, hon, there's something wrong here. This meter is turning. Then we get the plumber and say, Mr. Plumber, please go and have a look there. The new owner is saying that all the taps are closed, but the water meter is turning. So what's going on there? So the plumber will then go out. He issued the certificate confirming that there are no issues, So he must go and fix whatever is wrong there. So that is it. I just want to go and have a look quickly to see whether there are any questions. Yes, for example, the gas certificate, if it is outside, as far as I know, it must be in a metal cage that can be locked and stuff like that. Thank you. I didn't even know that. So there's no gas certificate required if the bottle is inside the house. If there is any gas bottle or any gas installation, as far as I know, if there's any gas on the property, then you need a certificate because they're still going to come and check whether there are any leaks between the bottle and the appliance that it is feeding. So, with the gas certificates, they must just come and check. If there's a gas bottle, they must come and check it, no matter what the size of the gas bottle, where the gas bottle is situated. They must come and check the gas installation. The regulations doesn't state that it is only for gas bottles of this size. Not at all. So as far as I know, for any gas installation, there must be a certificate. I know that in the past, the gas bottle had to be outside. You didn't have a choice. It had to be outside the property in a metal box with a lock, etc., etc., etc. I think the regulations changed to say that it can be inside the house as well, but I'm not sure about that. But because those rules and regulations change on a monthly basis.
Hein, it could be a provincial thing because
Maybe.
Petra's saying that's not true. And then Sharon Mattison from Richards Bay is saying, what if the gas bottle and stove are removed, but the gas line is still there?
Good. That's a good question because there is no appliance. So that is one phone call to a gas contractor to say, listen here, the stove, the fireplace, the braai, everything has been removed. There is a gas pipe, but there's no more appliances. Michelle, I dealt with a matter, I think it was in Edgemead, but it was a while ago, where that was exactly the case. It was a massive, it was a beautiful smeg, whatever gas, stove and whatever that cost 50,000 Rand. And the seller said, look, I'm removing this. I'm not going to leave this. This doesn't form part of the sale of the property. So the purchase, that's absolutely fine. You can take it with. I'll make my offer for the property. Forget about the stove. But there was a gas pipe, and there wasn't a bottle either. And I cannot, for the life of me, remember, because there was a gas installation, just the piping, whether the contractor still came to apply a gas bottle just to see whether there are any leaks in the pipes for further connection. I cannot remember. I don't think it was necessary. But it's one phone call to a gas contractor just to give him the scenario. Our scenario is X, Y, and Z. Do we need one? No, you don't need one. Fantastic. Let's move on. And that is it. Any other questions?
I think somebody's still typing, Han. So let's see. As I said, yeah. Petra said her gas bottle is in her cupboard, and for insurance purposes, she needed a compliance certificate.
Yeah, and they are. If it's in a cupboard, they allowed it. Obviously, if the certificate was issued and the bottle was in the cupboard, that's absolutely fine. As I said, because as I know in the past, the bottle had to be outside. But I know the regulations have changed. You can have the bottle inside the property these days. It's not necessary to feed it to outside in a metal box that can lock. That's not required anymore. So you can have it inside, absolutely.
All right. Great. Thanks, Han. I think that was very insightful, and thank you always for your input.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, guys. Always fun chatting.